Hi, my name's Graham Thompson. So, 20 years on from 9/11, the horror of that mass murder before the eyes of the world, and Joe Biden's vote fraud regime has left Afghanistan, leaving the Taliban armed to its back teeth, like it could never have ever even dreamed of or imagined. The people, the crook communist alliance that gave America Benghazi, has just given it Afghanistan. And if this crook communist alliance and the vote fraud that took it to power is not overthrown, it will be bringing America tyranny. I keep reading and hearing about the audits that are taking place and the people running them, and they keep saying things like the audits are not to change the outcome of the election. They're only to find out what went wrong in the election and to learn from what went wrong to ensure election integrity for the next time round. If the audits conclusively prove that Joe Biden took the White House through mass vote fraud, and a call to arms is not issued to oust his vote fraud regime, American democracy is finished. The Democrats, that biggest oxymoron in political history, are doing their utmost to frustrate those audits. And who, if they had nothing to hide, would be trying to avoid the transparency of a vote audit, apart from those who had won power through a vote fraud coup? If the conclusive proof of a vote fraud coup is established by the audits, the call to arms has to be given or American democracy is dead. If those vote audits cannot be completed, what then? If the obstruction of the Democrat Party succeeds in thwarting the findings of the audits, in my view, that would be as good a case as any for still issuing a call to arms to restore American democracy. We went into Iraq, and I'll touch on Iraq later as well. We, the US coalition, the United States and Britain, we went into Iraq because Saddam Hussein expelled the UN weapons inspectors. If the Democrats continue to frustrate, stall and stop the audits, that is grounds to go to war. So easy for me to mouth off about Britain, Barcelona, talking about the United States. It's Trump's neck on the block if he ever makes that call under either of those scenarios. But we are watching the United States fall before our eyes. If this vote fraud regime is not ousted, American democracy will die, and the West will die with it. So that is America. A Britain, Barcelona, one of my native land, Britain, the nation that I love. When 9/11 happened, my hope was that the good that would come of it is that it would restore the spirit, it would re-galvanize the values that defeated Hitler. And within a very short space of time, there were very ominous signs that quite the opposite to that was actually going to happen. And after only a few years, there was the inescapable conclusion that what 9/11 did was it revealed the abject state of moral bankruptcy of the West and of my country, Britain, and that we are there for the taking. Ominous signs and data that provides conclusive proof. Well, I think it was only just a few weeks after 9/11, and a lot of what I'm going to say is going to cross-lap with the United States. After only a few weeks, I can't remember the name of the network, it was a national US news network. They ran a report on American Muslims and how they've been affected by the Islamophobia backlash following 9/11. And there was this black American Muslim lady who was interviewed. And what she said was, she exulted that America got a good slap in the face on 9/11, obviously supporting that act of terror against the United States. And the journalist said nothing about it. She just carried on talking to her about, what Islamophobia have you suffered from? Oh, poor you. And nothing was made by anyone else about that report. That woman was an enemy of the United States. And it was cost-free her saying that on national television in America. Roll on. We had the Iraq War. What Tony Blair said about the Iraq War is that I'm remembering off the top of my head, so the exact words might not be right, but it's what he said. What Tony Blair said about Iraq and going into Iraq was that in a post 9/11 world, we cannot allow a tyrant, an enemy of the West like Saddam Hussein, to get away with expelling UN weapons inspectors, and how absolutely right he was. Nowadays, and for a good many years, about 3/4 of the nation is totally against the Iraq War, like it's self-evident what an appalling thing it was. And no matter how victory was squandered and botched, the world would be a far worse place than it is now if we had not gone into Iraq. If we had let Saddam Hussein, who absolutely conclusively, without doubt, had a weapons of mass destruction program, was pursuing a nuclear weapon. I remember in the lead up to Gulf War I, he held a press conference bragging about how his intelligence network had got hold of a critical technological piece he needed to make nuclear weapons. I mean, it was staring in the face. And countries like France and Russia vehemently opposed to the Iraq War because they'd been making illegal oil deals. They didn't dispute that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. They weren't found, apart from Saddam Hussein, who was a weapon of mass destruction in himself. Very good intelligence that as he sent his air force to Iran to avoid getting decimated by the Allies, husbanding his resources, as an American admiral had called it. there's good evidence, there's good intelligence evidence that he sent his WMDs, his chemical weapons capability, to Syria. Whatever the truth of that, there's absolutely no doubting that if we had let him get away with expelling UN weapons inspectors, the world would be even more a far more dangerous place than it is now. Zarqawi, Al-Qaeda leader Zarqawi, who did he go to when he got injured in Afghanistan? He came to Saddam Hussein because his enemy was Saddam Hussein's enemy, and at time of war, the enemy of your enemy is your friend, even if you do not share the exact same ideology. We've seen that with the totalitarian alliance between jihadists and the Marxist left in Britain and across the West. Guantanamo Bay. So we're at war. We capture the enemy. We detain the enemy, an enemy not covered by the Geneva Convention because they are irregular soldiers, if you want to call it that. In the legal term they were given by Bush's people, they were unlawful enemy combatants. They took to the battlefield in uniform. They were a terrorist army. Their main weapon of war was terrorism. And we had Guantanamo, or the Americans had Guantanamo, to keep these enemy combatants in detention through the duration of the war. And what happened? A hullabaloo that this was one of the greatest crimes against humanity, one of the greatest human rights violations in the history of mankind. We are in, and half the nation bought into it. And the other half weren't exactly forthcoming in coming down hard on those who were aiding and abetting the enemy at time of war by coming out with that enemy propaganda. We are in the age of moral imbecility. I've long had a view on life. Probably greatly informed by my Christian faith. I've long had a view on life that the vast majority of people want to see good triumph over evil, but most of them believe that evil is stronger than good, and when push comes to shove, they want to make sure they are seen to be on the side of evil. And when you see so many people running with enemy propaganda at time of war, I think that's a pretty good example to buttress that theory. Jihad John getting whacked by the RAF. What happened in the aftermath of that? We had caged prisoners. I can't remember the chap's name, a bit of a long-winded Islamic name, and an ex-Socialist Workers' Party guy, Ross or something like that. I can't quite remember now. They held, as are the Jihadi Front organisation, caged prisoners. They held a press conference that was live broadcast by Sky News and BBC for about an hour. Live broadcasting enemy propaganda at time of war. Without even a murmur from the powers that be or anyone about them acting like Lord Haw Haw against their own nations and needing to face responsibility. You cannot conduct a war like this. This is the moral bankruptcy of the West that 9/11 has revealed. And it's just getting worse and worse. 9/11 was an attack to bring down the United States as the guarantor of democracy in the West. Well, now they don't need to do that because the oxymoronic Democratic Party, that crook communist alliance, has already brought down Western democracy with mass vote fraud. And it's getting darker and darker and darker. We've got a Marxist assault on free speech, the essential undergirding of any democracy, through cancel culture, political correctness, wokery, whatever you want to call it, just threatening people's livelihoods, keeping people silent. Keeping people silent if they dare disagree with the shibboleths of the left that are designed to bring down democracy, undermine our moral fibre to live in freedom. The Marxist left are absolute masters of the psychology of fear. No one likes to admit that they agree with something out of fear. It hurts their ego. And when people go along with something out of fear, rather than admit that they're cowards and lowering their self-esteem, they try to convince themselves that they do actually agree with it. And the best way that they try to convince themselves of that is to join in the persecution of those brave enough to oppose evil and to vote for those who perpetrate that evil. That is the psychology of fear that makes cancel culture work, and that makes it a massive threat to democracy. I could chortle on forever, probably not saying anything different than I've already said now, but just repeating myself in different ways. Obviously not worth it. But 20 years after 9/11, this is where we are now. What I can say is, as a Christian believer, I can say now is the time to get right with God. There's a raison d'etre behind that phrase that has a logical flaw behind it. It is all, if you believe in God and you are away from God, now is always the right time to get back with God. But what that phrase means in itself is with what is happening now, if you cannot plainly see that the Lord that you have gone away from is the Lord you need to return to, you're never going to see it. Now is a good time to get right with God. And of course, if you don't believe in God, it's a pointless thing to say to someone. How are you going to get right with someone you do not believe in? There are many people, atheists, agnostics, who value their self-respect, who want to lead good lives, who believe that truth and following what is true is the way to lead a good life. And if you are those people, if you are that person, what I will say to you, if you follow truth on the path of righteousness that you are following, you will encounter the fount of righteousness, the Lord Jesus Christ. I was a devout atheist until the age of 18, and I'll tell you something for free now. If you want to know if God exists, if Jesus Christ is his son, to serve him, it's really very simple. If you truly want to know if God exists, to serve him, not just to know if he exists, because if it's just out of idle curiosity and not to serve him, your prayer will not be answered. If you want to know if God exists, to serve him, all you need to do, as I've just indicated, is pray to him. And the Lord will answer, not in your time, but in his time. When I was 16 years old, to me it was always axiomatic that if I knew that God exists, I would serve him. Just as simple as that. When I was 16 years old, I lay in bed at night praying ardently and fervently to God that if he existed, he would let me know. And I prayed and prayed and prayed, and then after that prayer, I waited, and nothing happened. So I thought, God does not exist. The Lord answered that prayer in his own time. 2 years later, something profound and existential happened in my life that led me in no doubt that God is real, that Jesus Christ is his only begotten Son who died for our sins. And I became a Christian. So if you believe in God and you're not with him, you see the darkness that is growing in the world. Get back and get right with God. If you're atheist or agnostic, but seek truth and ye shall find it. Pray to the Lord for him to make himself known to you. Yeah, my cats are always guaranteed to enhance the gravitas of my videos. Finally, what I will say is I am certain from what is happening that an evil is coming to the world, a tyranny is coming to the world that will make Stalin, Hitler, Zhao Zeping, Mao Zeping, whatever his name was, and Pol Pot look like amateur night. An evil beyond what we can imagine is coming to the world. And yet, that is even more reason why everyone who believes in Western civilization that is rooted in Judeo-Christian values, overlaid by the reason of the Greco-Roman era, that is why everyone who believes in Western civilization for faith, for self-respect, that leads to salvation, needs to double down in their defense of it. Churchill told us in our darkest hour, we shall fight them on the beaches, we shall fight them in the streets, we shall fight them in the hills, we shall never surrender. Well, the enemy within, the wreckers, have really taken a lot of the hills, a lot of the streets, and a lot of the beaches. We've kind of got our backs against the wall domestically. The people that Maggie Thatcher called the enemy within, the wreckers, are having tremendous success. And what Churchill also said, essentially, what we have in Britain is such a jewel, something to be so proud of, a pinnacle of Western civilization, that it would be better that we die choking on our own blood than surrender. If you are willing to fight and stand up for Western values, to defend the West against the evil coming at it from all fronts, from Iran, communist China, jihadi terrorists, the correctnik left, their fellow travellers, useful idiots and sheer cowards. If you are willing to fight to defend Western values, the most likely outcome by far for you is dying a horrible death. Don't fight for Western values unless you're willing to die that horrible death. And in so dying, you will consecrate your soul, and you shall be witness to those who are hanging in the balance that there is something worth dying for, that this life isn't about gratification, it's about living for love, and if necessary, dying for love. Stay true. The fat lady hasn't sung, and when she does sing, you will be in the glory of God for eternity. I said finally, my apologies. Lastly, how much must the wounds of grief be that much more open for the bereaved of that horror of mass murder on 9/11 than to see those who perpetrated it being surrendered to in the way that happened in that botched withdrawal by the Biden regime. Hopes and prayers for all those loved ones and for all those who grieve for them, but not just those, not just them, all those in the US coalition. Let's call it what it is, the US coalition, NATO. America is the heavy lifter in NATO. Let us remember all those in the US coalition, US soldiers, British soldiers and all allies who laid down their lives to make sure that what happened on 9/11 did not happen again. The enemy wanted to do far, far worse to us that day. And by giving their full measure of devotion, they have stopped that happening. Their sacrifice has not been in vain. What we have to decide now, in their memory and in memory of the wounded with wounds visible and invisible, we have to honour their sacrifice. So today, 9/11, I'm so sorry for having chundered on so much, but today, 9/11, let's remember those who gave their all to defend our freedom, and the family of the loved ones who were murdered on that horrendous day. God bless you all.